Awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Sam. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the Member Experience Manager at Advent Co-working. I want to thank you for joining us for today's Advent Member Talk. As you know, this is a weekly event that we put on. So each week features a different member on the topic of their choice. And this gives our members an opportunity to share their skills and experience with not only fellow Advent members, but with the greater Charlotte community. So I want to welcome Stefania to our member talk today. She's a co-founder of the Carolina Migrant Network. So if you joined us last week, you saw Becca talking about the history of ICE and here in Charlotte and their advocacy work that they do. And so this is a continuation of this conversation. Now, if you have any questions for Stefania, feel free to just comment them and we'll do a short Q&A at the end. So I will hand it over to you. You're muted.
Sorry, I guess I should unmute myself.
I'm the person who stays muted on the calls and keeps talking, so
there you go.
Good.
So my name is Stefania Arteaga. I am one of the co-founders of the Carolina Migrant Network. And I use she, her, aya pronouns. Just to give a bit of background, the Carolina Migrant Network is currently the only legal service provider in the state that is providing direct pro bono bond representation to people picked up. Most of the direct services that are provided in the state really focus around, asylum seekers or people who in very specific categories, partly because it has to do a lot with, I would say, like mainstream immigrant rights or immigrant service organizations narrative around like good immigrant, bad immigrant narratives. And so the Carolina Migrant Network provides bond representation to folks that otherwise wouldn't have access to it. And so what that really means is that unlike criminal court, where you are provided a public defender to represent you in your criminal process or whatever process, and unlike that in immigration, you're not entitled to legal representation. And so for folks that don't know, Mecklenburg County has been kind of like this hot, this very ground zero, I would say, in terms of people who ground zero in terms of like ICE enforcement and ICE collaboration and any extension of ICE enforcement. And so the Carolina Migrant Network came to be because for a variety of reasons, one being that since the mid 2000s, we've seen a lot of increased infrastructure, if you would say, around ICE enforcement or the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice. So in 2006, we saw the first 287G agreement, which is a contract between local law enforcement and ICE to deputize sheriffs. We saw the first contract east of Mississippi here in Charlotte, in Mecklenburg County. Our county commissioners passed it, cost us millions of dollars, and 12 years later, over 15,000 people who were placed in deportation proceedings because of it. Not to say like the thousands of county dollars that, were also wasted through that. And so that program led to the spread of other 287G like programs across the state. And then 2 years later in 2008, we saw the first immigration court in Charlotte. It's actually in East Charlotte that supports or manages the dockets for people in North and South Carolina who are not detained, who are not in a detention center right now, but are out and fighting their cases. And so, this attention, basically immigration detention across the region has been pretty high. Not only like now under the Trump administration, but also previously under the Obama administration. We had operations like Operation Border Guardian in 2015, who maybe some folks may remember or not, but there were youth that were being picked up at bus stops across CMS, and there was a lot of concern around the safety of undocumented to documented and documented students going to school. And so basically, Carolina Migrant came to be after 287G was removed from Mecklenburg County, and in preparation of the retaliation that was going to continue, and also just because there wasn't anybody really providing the support of families. And so, if you're currently detained in what ends up happening, if you're detained in North Carolina, you're actually moved to Georgia. And so you're moved across state lines. If you were, if your arrest came due to being in contact with law enforcement, then that means that you will not be able to come back to the county in where you are facing, what XYZ legal issue. You would actually be transported across state lines to Georgia and try to fight your case. And so there's 4 detention centers in Georgia, but the biggest one, and it's one of the biggest ones in the country actually, is the Stewart Detention Center. And in that detention center, basically what ends up happening is that very little representation. It's an extremely rural part of Georgia. It's very close to the Alabama border. And there's only about a 3%, I think it's like 3 to 5% retention rate of attorneys. That means only 3 to 5% of the people in that detention center actually have an attorney that's fighting for their case. And then when we talk about bond, which is the opportunity to get out of detention and fight your case outside, the numbers are also very bleak. So in the Charlotte Immigration Court, for example, only 17% of the bond motions filed were getting approved, and as a whole, the number of bond motions that were being submitted was really low. And then when you look at bond motion approvals in the Stewart Detention Center in comparison, they were a lot higher, but there were also people who were in detention, in a for-profit detention center that's notorious for numerous amounts of deaths, unsanitary health conditions, and now you add COVID to it, and it's even more dangerous situation. And so the Carolina Migrant Network came to be because of just an acknowledgement and a need of, one, the criminalization of Black and Brown people by law enforcement that places them in these situations, right? If you're a U.S. citizen, you will face some type of either financial or family hardship by coming into the criminal justice system, right? And then with folks who are not U.S. citizens, you see that, plus you see this, I guess what you can call it, like removal from your community as a whole into a secluded area, in where you're basically not really granted a lot of due process. And so, taking that into consideration, this is not, a fix-all solution, right? Like, this is still a system who profit, and by this system I mean immigration detention is a system that's profiting off of people's bodies. I mean, the U.S. government has a daily bed quota that was passed by Congress under the Obama administration, and so our federal taxpayer dollars goes to ensuring that there's at least, I think it's like 200 and something beds that are filled across the country that mostly go to for-profit immigration detention centers. And so, acknowledging that, people are at higher risk in their communities just due to over policing, acknowledging that we have a growing population of immigrants in the state and a lack of infrastructure or in terms of legal services that are provided. We really thought, me and my co-founder partner in crime, Becca O'Neill, really saw the need to make sure we can start building the foundation of this kind of work to really, to really provide folks the opportunity to fight their case, and also to just be really front and clear that we can't turn people away from fighting their case because they've come in contact with law enforcement. Because we know that law enforcement, because we know that law enforcement is problematic and it doesn't make us safe. And, ultimately the the consequences of coming into contact with law enforcement are serious, you know. Um, and so, it's really exciting to be able to launch. We actually started in October of last year. The first case we actually took was of somebody who was in a vehicle. ICE tried to enter and open his vehicle without a warrant, and ICE's decision was to actually break open the window and drag him out, violating his civil rights. After he had mentioned that that they had to communicate with his attorney. So that was the first actual case that we took back in October of last year. We officially launched in January, and we have been representing people across North Carolina, South Carolina, New Jersey, and Virginia. Um, this work is very innovative for the South, particularly our region, because, like I mentioned before, there aren't people who are doing this work. Um, and so we're just really happy and proud to be able to do this, while also recognizing that this is a band-aid solution, right? There is more organizing work that needs to be done on the ground to really address that, and talk about how address the way that immigration detention is part of mass incarceration, is part of the criminalizing of Black and brown bodies, and that we need to take steps to really abolish these systems. And so, um, I think that's just kind of some of the things of in terms of like how we got there. Both Becca and I come from an organizing legal nonprofit background, and so we've worked together in the past and just really seen the need, and especially in Charlotte, where we have one of the highest populations of immigrants, both documented and undocumented. It's across the board. And so acknowledging that as the city grows, right, there is going to be a need for more support. And as like the 16th, we always talk about this in Charlotte, like we're the 16th largest city in the country. We're really far behind in terms of what support we offer to our neighbors. And so that's really kind of what we're trying to do, is making sure that people have that access, um, and also uplifting their voices and their stories as well as they see fit. Because we hear all sorts of stories that come, people who were political activists in their home countries and can't return, people who have been, victims of domestic violence and are feeling empowered. And so forth. And so it's really exciting work. We're really happy to be able to do this work. It's work that fulfills us, and we know is maybe not making a lot of structural difference right now, but we are helping individuals who at this moment have nowhere else to turn. So Sam, I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah, for sure. We have some questions in the comments, but first I was wondering, last week Becca talked about this too, but we've mentioned it in our newsletter a few times that you appear in a docuseries that's new on Netflix. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that docuseries, especially about like the work that you've done.
Yeah, definitely. So the docuseries Immigration Nation, the Charlotte is one of the cities or the stories that is featured, and I happen to be in it. And it tells the story of another organization that I work with, Comunidad Colectiva, that ran a campaign to unseat an incumbent for the sheriff's election in 2018, and to unseat Erwin Carmichael, with the purpose of making sure that he ended 287G, ended solitary confinement for minors, and brought back in-person visitation. And so the docuseries shares a bit of the campaign work to unseat Carmichael and really bring these campaign points forward. And then also shares the retaliation that we faced in Mecklenburg County by ICE. So as we were launching this campaign, ICE was, working with the sheriff at the time, the incumbent Carmichael, giving him his talking points, giving them basically providing all this PR support in an ongoing election, which is problematic within itself, considering he was running for re-election and he had a federal agency, helping him. and then at the same time threatening us that they were going to increase enforcement, that they were going to be out in the streets, when in reality, you did have a sheriff who collaborated with ICE through the 287G program, was already picking people up. I believe the number was like, I think 1,200 or 1,100 people a year. And then you had consistent operations happening in the winter, the spring, and the fall, simultaneously, right? And so, I think ICE is really utilizing just fear mongering to try to scare communities into not collaborating with them. And so, what we ended up seeing, what the documentary ends up showing is the way in which ICE had strategically planned retaliation against Mecklenburg County residents for making the decision to elect a different sheriff, um, and trying to basically get the program reinstated. And it's not just that. There's also stories about family separation at the border, which was a very heavy topic in April of 2019. There's stories about wage theft and discrimination that happens, all over this country. In Charlotte as well. And there's also stories of people who, came to this country trying to seek refuge and were turned away, pretty to face really horrible, just horrible fate in their home countries. And so yeah, so it's Immigration Nation. It's a 6-part series on Netflix. If you are up for it, definitely recommend that you watch it. Bring a lot of tissues. Maybe watch it with somebody. It's pretty intense, and it's pretty real. And I think one thing that I really appreciated about the documentary is that it shows the multiple civil rights violations that people on the ground and organizers have been saying for so long. ICE not using, pretending to be local law enforcement, ICE pretending that they actually have warrants to enter people's homes when they're not, or entering illegally into people's homes. And so, or just, even bragging about the way in which they questionably detain people, or how they wear them down at the border after they're exhausted for walking days on end in the desert. And so it's a pretty interesting documentary to watch. I really encourage everybody to do so.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. I've started watching it, but I haven't gotten to the episodes yet, 3 and 4. It definitely is heavy and hard to watch, but very important.
Yeah.
So we have 2 questions from Amy. The first one is, why do people get moved to Georgia? So you mentioned that, sorry, my cat's here now.
Hi, cat.
You mentioned that when folks get arrested by ICE, if they're detained, they get moved to Georgia. Could you speak more to that, please?
Yeah, definitely. So not so this in the state of North Carolina, we don't have private detention centers, and we also don't have like long-term detention centers to hold people. So the only detention center that we have is actually in Alamance County. And it's through what's called an intergovernmental service agreement. So usually what ICE does is that they enter into, so ICE doesn't have like jails, right? So they like basically they rely on for-profit prisons that provide this service, or they enter into contracts with county jails. And there's a lot that I could go on. So for example, in Alamance County has a contract. They were actually sued by the Department of Justice back in 2010 for racial profiling under their 287G agreement, and were forced to take away. And they were kind of like in this probation program where they like had to report who they arrested, the demographics, and all these other different things, which of course didn't really happen because that decision didn't really come out until like a year or two after the Trump administration. And so under this administration, they once again filed into it, asked to be part of 287G agreement, didn't get it, but they got this like multi-million dollar funding from the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, to create this, to expand their facility and hold immigration detainees. But what's scary about these is that, basically these IGSAs lower the federal, like, so instead of meeting the federal regulation of like standards, they like grandfather in. So you're basically like looking at standards from like decades ago. So that's one thing. And also, like Alamance County doesn't have like a recreation area, so they can only hold people for 45 days, things like that. And they end up transferring people to Georgia because it's a long-term facility. So usually what ends up happening, if you don't have representation, you will literally just sit there until they deport you. But what people don't know is these are civil violations. Like immigration is civil. There are some overlaps with criminal law, but most of it is civil violations. And so people just literally sit there until they see a judge because they don't have representation. It's not awarded to them. And so Georgia and we're actually like this gap state between Virginia and Georgia that does not have for-profit detention centers. And so, and if you look at the map of the United States in my office, I used to have this map, and where it basically showed you how using through major interstates, detention centers popped up, and most of it was until people got to Louisiana, which was like the shipping off point of where you were officially deployed. But yeah, in Atlanta, that's kind of the place. It's for profit. It's also in rural areas, so it's kind of like an incentive, let's say, for rural counties that don't have, employment. So yes, I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's an awful system
Yeah,
around.
I messed up.
Yeah. So second question is, what can citizens do to help you? I'm assuming
Yeah.
you mean like U.S. citizens.
Yeah, so U.S. citizens can do a lot. So here's a couple of things that other people don't know. One, I think you can definitely help us by donating. Just put that out there. You can definitely help us by donating. This work is completely free to people who are who are in this situations. Most of the people detained are people who are the main breadwinners. Mostly it's men. And so what ends up happening is that families completely lose their financial situation, and it gets worse, because of COVID. And so what ends up happening is that, so the reason why we provide this bond service is because your immigration bond is going to run you about, can run up to like $15,000 to $30,000, which you can't go to a bondsman and say, hey, I need a bond. I need to get a loan to pay this out. It doesn't work that way because they're considered high risk. And so what ends up happening is the reason we provide this is because, all right, cool, we will do the bond case absolutely free. Whereas if they went to a private immigration attorney, that immigration attorney could run them anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 plus the bond motion. And so we really try to make sure that we advocate as much as possible to show the financial grievance of our clients, and really lift, lower the burden and that we can do. Also, one of the things that we'd notice is that a lot of people face a lot of instability. So for example, we had a client who had been in detention for 18 months. And what ends up happening is that ICE just throws away all your things. And at that point, his family system was very limited. And what we had to do is collect clothing and bring it to him. So simple things such as signing up for a newsletter and just being willing to provide just basic necessities, because people leave detention just like they leave jail in Mecklenburg County with nothing, just whatever clothes on their back that there may be we're able to keep. And then just lastly, I would just say just share information. You can find us at Carolina Migrant Network on Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you so much, Stefania. And, for folks watching now or for later, I will include kind of where you can find their organization when I post this to our YouTube channel, Advent Co-working Videos. But Stefania, if folks do want to learn more or if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Yeah, so they can reach me at Stefania, and I'll write that down. Stefania at carolinamigrantnetwork.org. And you can just reach out, network.org, sorry. And you can just reach out. I'm really happy to talk to folks. We also provide CLEs, so we do a yearly CLE class, so continuing education learning credit for attorneys who want to volunteer with us. And so usually you have to pay for a CLE, but we will do the CLE for free. You will get the hours that you need to keep your license, and all with the commitment that you take on a case with us. That's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us all of that information. I know that's like so much to cover in such a short amount of time. And thank you to everyone who's joined us to watch today. I hope you will join us again next week, Tuesday at 4:30. And we're going to have Eric with Trips for Kids Charlotte joining us. So thank you, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.